All right, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Morgan Crossman, and I'm the Executive Director at Building Bright Futures. Welcome to the February State Advisory Council meeting. Today's meeting is largely focused on early childhood policy, so we'll have a mid-session update on the priorities and legislative issues facing our children and families. We'll have a presentation on the Cradle to Career vision by agency leadership. We will reground our work in Goal 4 of Vermont's Early Childhood Action Plan, or the VCAP. And then we'll end today's session in small group discussions where we'll really be focusing on where the challenges, but also opportunities lie in improving integration in our early childhood system. So just for a couple of quick housekeeping comments. First, we ask that everyone be on mute for today's discussion. We will be recording the overall session, but we will not record the small group sections, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that will look like a little bit later. And before you start, if this is your first BBF State Advisory Council meeting, it is our practice to start with a mindful moment. So I do want to ask Amanda Biggs to lead us through that exercise.
Hi, everyone. I wanted to share a quick mindful moment with you all. I actually selected a card from this amazing deck I have that's called Mindful Kids for ages 4 to 104. The card I chose today is a compassion exercise. It's short and sweet, but I will ask you to turn your video off. Find a nice seated, comfortable position. And just start by sitting mindfully with your spine straight and your body relaxed. Close your eyes and take 3 soft, slow, mindful breaths. Think of someone who makes you happy. Maybe it's a person you love or a special pet. Imagine your feelings for that person or pet as golden rays of light in your heart. Breathe in and out and imagine sending the golden light to a friend who needs kindness today. And now you can visualize that friend or pet smiling. And with your next out breath, send your golden light to someone you don't know very well. And visualize that person receiving your light. Now breathe in and out and share your golden rays with someone you feel grumpy towards. And watch your kindness help that person. Finally, take a deep breath and share your golden light with everyone in the world. Imagine everyone laughing together right now. And smile with that happy feeling. And let's pause and take 2 more deep, full breaths before we open our eyes. And when you're ready, I invite you to turn your camera back on.
Thank you, Amanda. For those of you who just joined us, we just completed our very brief mindful moment. We'll now transition to Chloe Leary to do introductions of the State Advisory Council.
Great, thank you. Can you hear me okay? Great. Wow, thanks everybody for coming. We are going to do a little bit of council business. I'm going to start with a roll call and introductions. First, I'd like to welcome Miranda Gray, who's the interim deputy commissioner for the Child Development Division, recently appointed. So welcome, Miranda, to our council. And so I'm going to do the roll call. If you would, I think we kind of need a verbal hello since we have so many screens. Would that make sense? Is that okay? And then while the State Advisory Council members are just verbally affirming that they're here, if others of you could introduce yourselves in the chat bar with a name, whether you're a parent or with an organization, early childhood parent, what region you're from, and if you're connected to the BBF network, how you are connected. So I know we have lots of people here, lots of time in the chat to fill that in, but we'd like a record of who is here at our virtual table. So thank you for introducing yourselves there. And then I will start with the State Advisory Committee roll call. So Renee Kelly, if you're here, if you could say hello. Okay. Miranda Gray.
Hello.
Hi, Miranda. Welcome.
Thank
Ken
you.
Jones.
Hey, Chloe, it's Renee. Just want to let you know I'm here. I couldn't get myself off mute.
Hi, Renee. Thank you.
Hi.
Ken, are you here? Kate Rogers.
Hi, everyone. I'm here.
Hi, Kate. Alyssa Stahlberg or maybe Janet Kilburn.
This is Elisa. I'm here.
I'm sorry, Lisa.
No worries.
I'll get it right next time. Representative Jessica Brumstead, are you with us?
Yes, hi, I'm here. Thank you.
Hello. And then Cheryl Wilcox, are you with us?
I am. Good afternoon, everyone.
Nice to see you.
It's nice to see you too.
And Kim Kaiser.
Yes, I'm here.
Hi, Kim. Allie Richards.
Allie will be jumping on at 1:30.
Okay, great. I'm here. Julie Cadwallader-Staub.
I'm here. Hi, everyone.
Thank you. Nicole Grenier.
Oh my God, 200 people.
Emily Merrill, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here. Hi,
Hi,
everyone.
Emily. And then Amy Johnson.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Amy. Christy Swenson. No. All right, and then Flor Diaz-Smith.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, Flor. Great, thank you all. Thanks for all the notes in the chat as well. It's great to see so many people here once again. I'm going to go ahead just to get us started on the tone, on a sort of create the context. We have 3 State Advisory Council members who have done a little thinking about a question, reflective question. I'm going to ask the question again. If you are welcome to answer the question in the chat, but I'm going to call on some State Advisory Council members to share with us sort of as we've been thinking about the pandemic. We've heard about challenges facing families. We did a survey, and there are lots of different, experiences out there. And as we think ahead, really quickly, and I'm going to start, Emily, with you. How are you and your team responding to current challenges, meeting the challenges of children, families, and professionals? And what will families need in the pandemic recovery phase of life? So either one of those, just real quick reflections, that would be great. So Emily, we'll start with you.
Absolutely. Thanks, Chloe. I'm going to take on the second portion of that question, which is what would families need? And I just wanted to note a story someone told me, which is that they had a baby 9 months ago and that their baby has never played with another child. And so that is just one example of many, many families who are experiencing isolation. And it reminds me of this incredible childcare I once toured, where I said to the director, I think my child might need some, extra attention in the gross motor area. And she said, this is a therapeutic childcare. Everybody here needs that. And I think taking that approach, everybody needs a little bit of therapeutic intervention, not just in their early childhood environments, but also in terms of educating families about how to provide that care and have that developmental perspective with their own families.
Great, thank you, Emily. And then Christy, did you join us? I'm not sure if you were on or not.
Yep, I'm here.
Oh, great, there you are. Hi, Christy.
Hi. So I guess have some concerns about as we move into the recovery period from the pandemic. And what folks are telling me, that folks that are working with families, if they have several families that they're concerned about housing for once the pandemic is over, because, as a lot of families are, the families we meet don't have enough money to pay all the things they need to pay. And now because there's the moratorium on them, being evicted, that isn't as high on their priority list. And so they're paying off other bills first. And so then long-term, what is that going to mean for those families when they no longer have good credit for housing? We're a little concerned.
Great point, Christy. Thank you for raising that. And then Amy, did you have any reflections you wanted to share?
Yeah, I think that I have a lot. I'm never brief, but I'll try and be. I have a lot of thoughts around this, and I think that it's not lost on any of us that there is a human services surge that is upon us and will continue as we move into COVID recovery. And I think that it's really important for us to come together to think about that collective impact model that we've touted for so long, that's been incredibly important, but even more so now, and really walk that talk. We've talked about that for a long time, but really do it. And I feel like we're moving into that, or a lot of us are trying to do that. And that investment in the direct services, that we are seeing very high acuity kids, and we are trying to see them as often as we can. We have staff with very high caseloads, and knowing that we need to invest in those resources, those human resources, to be able to serve families the way that they need to be served. And so I think that we just need to continue to recognize and talk and keep the lines of communication open and not silo ourselves, and be able to support the work on the ground, because it will continue and will continue to be more complex, and keeping that kind of multi-gen model in mind, because it's not just the kids by themselves that are being impacted. It's that whole family system, the community, kind of every aspect is being hit by this. So I just appreciate everybody who's here. A lot of people are invested, and I hope that we can work together to support families as we continue into, the 1 year of COVID.
Yes, thank you. And as we've said so many times, in many ways, the pandemic magnified what was already an issue. So I think not necessarily a surprise, but thank you, the three of you, for sort of highlighting the needs of children and families statewide that we're going to be facing as we head into this time. So, and again, if anybody has thoughts in the group, feel free to put them in the chat. What are you most worried about? What are you thinking about in recovery? What are you seeing happening in your communities? That helps us. We'll capture that, and that would be, it's always good information to have. Very quickly, we are going to do some business approving minutes, and then we will get to the policy section of our meeting today. So we have 2 months of minutes to approve. We have November, so I'd like to ask for a motion from someone, a council member, to accept the November minutes. I can't see anybody. Somebody verbally say.
So move, Flor.
So Flor moved, and could I have a second?
This is Julie, happy to second.
Thank you, Julie. All those in favor? You could unmute and say aye.
Aye.
Hi.
Aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? And anyone abstaining? Okay. I'm going to go to January minutes. So I need a motion to approve the January minutes.
So moved. This is Julie.
Thank you, Julie. And a second?
I'll second. This is Christy.
Christy, thank you. And all those in favor? If I unmute and say aye, or raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Great. And anybody opposed? And anybody abstaining for January minutes?
This is Emily. I'm abstaining.
Okay, great. Thank you, Emily. Wonderful, that was painless. And so I just want to make a note that in March, we do have some council members leaving, so we will acknowledge that and appreciate their service. And you will see an email coming out in the next month before our March meeting about council membership. So stay tuned on that. And I think we're through business, so I'm going to hand it back to Morgan.
All right, thank you, Chloe. And so before we transition into the policy section, for anyone just joining, I'm Dr. Morgan Crossman. I'm the Executive Director of Building Bright Futures. We just completed the very short business section of our meeting today. I think it's important for folks to know that, yes, this is the State Advisory Council Board meeting, which is 23 governor appointed and at-large members. These are also public meetings, which is why you are seeing over 220 people attend today, because folks are really committed to thinking about integration in our system of services, which is a very large topic. We also are focused on the policy agenda. But for those of you who aren't traditionally at these tables, we do just want to give you a quick overview of Building Bright Futures and our network infrastructure. So as many of you know, BBF is Vermont's Early Childhood Public-Private Partnership, charged under Vermont's Act 104 to be Vermont's Early Childhood State Advisory Council. And that is the mechanism used to advise the governor and the legislature on the status of children in the prenatal period through age 8 and their families. Our mission is to improve the well-being of children and families in Vermont using evidence to inform policy and bringing together voices across sectors and within regions to discuss critical challenges and problem solve. BBF and this entire network also maintains the vision and strategic plan for Vermont's early childhood system. And this infrastructure includes over 450 early childhood stakeholders on a monthly basis at any given time. So when you look at the visual on your screen right now, at the very base of that is a network of 12 regional councils. And at every layer, we have both public and private partners coming together in a volunteer capacity to do this work together. So on the ground in the regions, it's really about identifying barriers, strategizing and problem solving to meet the needs of kids and families, and then elevate those up through our layers of the infrastructure. We also have 7 Vermont Early Childhood Action Plan committees, or VCAP committees, that are really charged with upholding and monitoring the strategic vision and the plan for the state of Vermont. And then at that next layer is the State Advisory Council, which is 23 governor appointed and at-large members across sectors. And these are leaders coming together to issue recommendations, increase coordination, and advance an evolving and connected system, and really in that capacity to advise the governor and legislature. So under Vermont's Act 104, one of the key components of our work is to monitor the early childhood system of services. And one of the ways that we do that is through the production of so many different types of reports, publications, and resources. So what you're seeing on your screen right now are 3 different examples of what's been produced in the last 6 months. The first is the How Are Vermont's Young Children and Families report. And that gives you a quick snapshot of data from the COVID-19 pandemic, but also over the last year and what we're really looking at for kids and families within this last year. The middle document is the executive summary from the 2020 Early Childhood Needs Assessment. That's an 80-page document of the needs, barriers, challenges, and opportunities for kids and families in the early childhood arena for the past 5 years. A part of that document is a 10-page data gaps summary. So really important work that went into saying, here are the gaps and challenges, both right now, during the pandemic, and over the last 5 years for kids and families. The last document on the right is Vermont's Early Childhood Strategic Plan. That's the first page of a 3-page executive summary, and we'll talk more about that plan a little bit later today. But we wanted you to all know that there are a series of resources on the BBF website and at a new platform that we just set up in the last month called Vermont's Early Childhood Resource Data and Policy Center. So that can be found at vermontkidsdata.org. And all of these resources are under publications. So we highly suggest you take a look at that website to see what data is on there and all of the different resources, webinars, and publications, not just from Building Bright Futures, but from our partners across the state as well. I also want to note, especially because we have a lot of additional parties involved in today's State Advisory Council meeting, that Building Bright Futures State Advisory Council as an entire body does not advocate on, support, or oppose any specific bill, legislation, or proposal. Our role is really to play that neutral convener role to identify and provide recommendations that are really moving the field towards the 4 goals that we've identified in Vermont's Early Childhood Action Plan, and that we have all committed to using the most up-to-date, high-quality data, expert opinion, and elevating the voices of families and communities. And today's session is really focused on early childhood policy, and it's so that the State Advisory Council can be aware of what's happening in the legislature and other things to keep their eyes on. So with that, I do want to transition us to two of our key advocacy partners, and they are going to provide our mid-session update on priorities in the early childhood legislative arena. So Matt Levin will be here to speak on the issues for the Vermont Early Childhood Advocacy Alliance's agenda. Sarah Kenny and partners from Let's Grow Kids will speak specifically to H171, really focused on childcare financing and governance. I do want to ask that while Matt and Sarah are giving their presentations, that we hold all of our questions to the end. We will ask that the State Advisory Council board members will ask questions verbally. Others, partners, we do want you to ask questions in the chat. We will capture all of those and then provide them to Sarah and Matt if we aren't able to get to all of them during today's discussion. So Matt and Sarah, if you're here, you can talk about who's going to go first. I think it's Matt.
Is Matt? I'll be going first. Beth, I don't know if you want to do a screen share of the legislative agenda or not. I know it was available for folks. I can do this verbally. If people are visual learners, it might help if folks have that cue as well.
Sure, I can bring it up.
Okay, great. Thanks. So I'm Matt Levin. I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont Early Childhood Advocacy Alliance. Thank you to BBF and to Morgan for giving us a little bit of time to update you on some of our work. I just want to follow up on what Morgan said. This is intended for informational purposes only. This represents the view and the work of the Alliance and our partners and members. We're not asking anyone to do anything, and we're not suggesting that these positions that we may talk about or the issues that we're talking about are directly connected to BBF. In one way they are, but for the most part, in terms when it comes to advocacy, this is just information for folks. Also want to note that this is a rapidly changing environment. In fact, some of it's changing today. The House Appropriations Committee is meeting as we speak, working on different spending proposals. So whatever we may tell you today, check back because it probably will be different in a few days. We do have an annual legislative agenda, which was made available to folks, and we might see it here visually in a moment. It includes 11 issues that have come up through the early childhood community to our coalition. All these issues represent issues where there's a lead organization. That's great, Beth, thank you. Where there's a lead organization, which I'll mention briefly, and also has unanimous support, at least on the policy level, from our community. We work on a consensus basis. So these are all issues where folks are supporting it. Really important to note, again, this is a bottom-up way of doing things. These aren't our priorities or our decision per se, although our coalition's behind it. These are all issues that come to us from within the community, and we're working to support those. So I'm going to go over really briefly each of these issues where there's been some progress in the first third or so of the legislative session. Not going to go into a lot of detail, not going to talk about every issue. And we'll note that for a lot of these, the issue is about the budget. And so the administration has come in with one number and we're offering a different number. That's a normal part of the process. Just because we have different positions doesn't mean we're not, in many ways, a lot committed to the same goals. So just want to make sure that's stated up front. So these are listed in no particular order. I will go across the board here from left to right, and then we'll go to page 2. Again, Sarah and her team will talk specifically about H171 and the childcare is essential issue, which you see on this part of the presentation. So the first issue here on the far left is funding for special accommodation grants. These are grants that help kids stay in childcare and provide some extra supports to providers so that they can keep kids engaged in a positive way. We're asking for increased funding for this. The governor has level funded this in his proposed budget, which is it's good that it's in there. We appreciate it's in there. We're asking for a few small changes and some increased funding levels. One of the changes would be to make it have a specific line item. The House Human Services Committee is has considered our request and has forwarded support for some of those ideas to the House Appropriations Committee. This is a pattern for pretty much most of these issues right now, where the House policy committees have waded in and voiced their position on things and sent their opinions to the House Appropriations Committee, which is working on budget writing. So level funding is in the budget right now for $300,000. We're asking for an increase of $500,000. At this point, we don't have support for that, but that's what we're asking for in the budget writing process. The next issue is housing. a tremendously complicated issue with lots and lots and lots of different moving pieces. I'm not even going to try to summarize them all. But the governor has proposed some significant one-time spending in housing, which we very much support, and a variety of proposals on the ongoing programming. One of the important things to note is that there's been a proposal to move the way that emergency housing has been provided. Right now, it's provided on a statewide level. There's a proposal to move it to a more regional delivery. That's a proposal that we're suggesting should be delayed until after the pandemic response is finalized and the community partners have had more chances to figure out how it would work for them. And the policy committees in the House have supported that position. But again, very much early in the process. Universal school meals is a proposal that's being discussed mostly on the Senate side right now. And the Senate Agriculture Committee is working on a bill. It's a committee bill that would include this proposal. There's a lot of support for it. There's some funding questions, but on the policy level, there's a lot of support for it in the Senate. They're taking the lead on this, and the lead organization on this issue is Hunger Free Vermont. So they're very much involved with other partners on this proposal. Again, the Senate's taking the lead on that one. Childcare is essential. That's captured in H171, which Sarah's going to talk about in a moment. This next issue, it's interesting. This is an indication of how we write our legislative agenda in November, and then the legislature happens. So the next issue is about Reach Up funding. And back in November, and December and January, we were focused on looking at increasing the rental subsidies to support Reach Up families. Since then, there's been a lot of thinking, a lot of development in the policy options, and there's more interest in trying to do some one-time payments or increasing the overall payment level to Reach Up families. The House Human Services Committee has expressed support for increasing that base funding level. It's got a long way to go in the process. I'd also note that there's one-time funding that is being suggested for Reach Up families for pandemic response and a whole bunch of other parts of the early childhood system, but that's one in particular that's gotten notice. So there's a lot of discussion about Reach Up benefits and what the right levels are and how to help those families with funding that's available in a sustainable way that can be continued over time. Last thing on this side is CIS, Children's Integrated Services. We've been pushing for years for increased funding for CIS. The governor's budget proposes level funding CIS. There's a lot of discussion about what the program should look like in the future. We're pushing for increased funding. The House Human Services Committee has indicated support for that. But again, a long way to go in the budget process. House Appropriations Committee has a lot of complex thinking to do to juggle all the different parts of the budgeting process. One-time money, federal pandemic response money, what the state revenues look like moving forward. Lots of complicated moving pieces. Beth, if you could go to the next slide, next page, that would be great. Thank you. The federal, the Family Medical Leave Insurance Program issue, again, moving from left to right. That's a complex issue on the policy level. Right now, the status of it is that we're waiting to see what the federal government does. There have been a couple bills dropped in the Vermont legislature, but most of the activity there is looking for the federal side of things to go first. The Biden administration is working on some proposals. Congress is working on proposals. So we're going to wait and see what happens with that. It also is tied in some ways in the pandemic response, since family and medical leave is part of the pandemic response as well. So no concrete action expected on this one for a number of months, perhaps not this legislative session, but a lot of activity nationally. Vermonters Feeding Vermonters is a program that's very well supported during the pandemic response and is looking for a permanent funding source. The food bank is the lead on that. There's been a lot of discussion about it. Again, the Senate Agriculture Committee is where a lot of these discussions are taking place. And it's just beginning the policy development process and the budgeting process. Similar with Farm to School, there's this one bill in Senate Agriculture that's talking about a lot of these different food, nutrition, food security issues. A lot of support in the committee for Farm to School for some increase in funding there from what was in the governor's budget. Again, has to get through the committee process, go to the budgeting process, but a lot of support in the Senate for that. Next comes the BBF funding. This is one place where we do actually intersect with BBF in a day-to-day manner. As some of you know, BBF is looking for a modest increase in funding from the state for their base funding for their administration and operations to do all the good work that they do. And this proposal was supported by House Human Services Committee. as all the other ones, going to House Appropriations for consideration in the budgeting process. Finally, parent-child centers, also level funded in the governor's budget. And there's an initiative that is starting in the Senate that would be a freestanding bill that would update the statutes that govern the parent-child centers and also increase their allocation. That too has a long ways to go. The bill hasn't been introduced yet, but the Senate's taking the lead on that. And there are lots of discussions throughout the legislature about the role of the parent-child centers and how they're supporting lots of different parts of the pandemic response and many parts of the ongoing response. And so they're front and center in a lot of conversations, but nothing yet in terms of any specific policy developments. So overall, the picture is our issues are very much being discussed. There are a lot of partnerships and a lot of commonality in terms of where we'd like to go, but there's questions about how much money is available and where it might be spent. And these conversations are really just beginning, and we expect that they'll really begin to accelerate, although they are also enormously complicated by the multiple funding streams that are being considered. And for those of you who are wondering what your summer is going to look like, don't be surprised if the legislature is in session beyond May, because there's a lot of questions about whether or not they'll be able to figure out how to spend the money that's coming our way, using the usual calendar and the usual schedule. So with that, again, as Morgan said, we'll hold questions, I think, to the end. Or do you want to do questions now for all these issues?
Yeah, let's start with questions. We're really great on time right now, Matt. So if State Advisory Council members, if you want to ask questions verbally about any component of the agenda or to any of the leads who may be on, please feel free to do that. And anyone from the other early childhood stakeholders who are on the call, please feel free to ask your questions in the chat bar.
There are lead organizations for each of these issues. I apologize for those who I didn't name along the way. And a big part of our agenda is the child care, early childhood education, professional development piece, which we haven't gotten to yet. So that's a whole big thing that you're going to hear about in just a moment. You can find out more information about all these issues on our website, which also include links to the lead organizations to their websites, where there's more in-depth information. You can also sign up at our website for our weekly newsletter, which gives you some sense of what's happening with these things, although we don't try to do updates on these on a weekly basis because there's just too much happening. You will, if you are getting our newsletter, tomorrow you're going to get a detailed report on all these things, a long narrative, which will go over all this stuff in a little bit more detail.
And Matt, before we transition to Sarah, can you just give a very quick overview of the Early Childhood Day at the legislature so that folks on this line can attend?
Yes, I'd love to. And perhaps one of you who can focus on that better than I can right now might put a link in the chat bar for those who might look at that. Beth or someone else, if you could do that, I'd appreciate it. Thank you. Yes, Early Childhood Day at the legislature is going on this year. It's going to be virtual, no surprise. And it's on the usual day in the calendar, which is the first Wednesday after the town meeting week. So that is March 10th. We have a slightly condensed agenda, but basically it's the same agenda as we've always done. Introductory remarks, comments by various members of the administration, 2 in-depth sessions on issues which are before the legislature, and then a lunchtime session, which will be bring your own, because we won't be enjoying the wonderful food at the Capitol Plaza, but the same concept, tables, virtual tables, but tables will be set up. So breakout rooms for people to talk in regions, in geographic areas with their legislators, and then a debrief and a follow-up. So it should be a great session. We're really looking forward to doing it this way once and not doing it this way ever again because the in-person contacts are so important, but we think we found a way to make it work this time virtually, and we really hope that people will attend. And further, we really hope that you'll ask your legislators to attend. Please, 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 if you're interested in advocacy and you want to make connections, this is the best time to do it. Legislators love this event. It's not a hard sell. Please consider reaching out to your legislators and asking them to attend. The link is right there on the chat bar. It's easy to find on our website, and we need help getting legislators there because everything's unusual this year. Getting the word out is a little harder than normal. So thank you, Morgan, for that hint to talk about that.
Of course. All right, if we don't have any specific questions on the broader legislative agenda, I do want to transition to Sarah Kenny from Let's Grow Kids to talk specifically about childcare and H171.
Thanks, Morgan, and thanks, Matt, for that helpful big picture overview. It's so nice to see all of your faces. So the great news is there is a child care bill, H171, that was introduced in the House of Representatives a couple weeks ago with 95 co-sponsors on it, which is almost 2/3 of the entire House of Representatives, which is amazing and a huge tribute to the work of many of you on this call today, connecting with legislators over the last many years to let them know just how important childcare is to you, to families, to communities, to employers, to our state as a whole. So we are very excited about this bill. I'm going to give just a quick rundown, like a high-level overview of what's in H171, and then talk a little bit about where it's at in the process, and then we'll be happy to take questions from folks about any details. There's a lot in this bill, so I don't want to get too deep in the weeds with you all. And thanks, Morgan, for sharing the link to the policy page on the Let's Grow Kids website, which includes a link directly to the bill itself, so you can see what was introduced, a handout that kind of gives a high-level overview of it, and our Let's Grow Kids white paper, which is a lot of which is reflected, a lot of that policy is reflected in H171. So this bill, H171, lays the foundation for our future childcare system, and it's really building on a lot of the work that many people have been involved with over the years, from the Blue Ribbon Commission in 2015 through the Appreciative Inquiry process and Building Vermont's Future from the Child Up, which many folks here engaged with, and then the think tank process. So it's really looking at all of the work that's come to date. And the administration's plans already for the Child Care Financial Assistance Program, and H171 kind of builds on all of that and sets us on the course for a future system. And the sort of highest level component of what this bill does is that it establishes the legislature's intent that by the end of 2025, a family will spend no more than 10% of their annual income on childcare. That families with young children will have access to high quality early childhood education, and that Vermont's early childhood educators, who are the backbone of our economy, are fairly compensated and well supported. And that applies to early childhood educators working across all settings, in home programs, in centers, nonprofit, for-profit, all the gamut of programs. So it does that. So because the legislature cannot put language in a bill that obligates future legislators to spend money. That's what's known as legislative intent, which is saying the legislature, literally it says the legislature intends that those pieces will come to fruition, and that's where this bill is moving us. It also continues the transformation of the Child Care Financial Assistance Program. So many of you may recall that in 2019, the legislature, the last child care bill the legislature worked on, the legislature worked really closely with the administration to launch a 5-year redesign of the Child Care Financial Assistance Program. And that expands eligibility in the program to more families, reduces family co-pays, and it increases reimbursements paid to programs on behalf of families. So that work is already in motion, and H171 is proposing to sort of amplify the last couple of years of that. So proceeding for this coming fiscal year, and then in the preceding 2 years, to dramatically expand the scope of the Child Care Financial Assistance Program to cover many, many more families, and building toward a place where all Vermont families are eligible for support based on their income level, to a point where no family is paying more than 10% of their income on childcare. It also, the H171 strengthens our early childhood education workforce by increasing investment this year in existing scholarships that are currently provided through the TEACH program, that are for people who are currently working in early childhood education programs. And then it also creates a new scholarship program and a student loan repayment support program, a new scholarship program for folks who are entering a degree program to try to recruit more people into the early childhood education field, and then a loan repayment support program for people who have recently graduated with early childhood education degrees, or early childhood special ed degrees, and supporting them in the early years of their career to be able to stay in the early childhood education field. And those components are really seen sort of as bridge supports until we get to this future place that the bill is building toward, where programs are paid reimbursement rates through the Child Care Financial Assistance Program on the behalf of most of the families in their program at a level that supports them to be able to pay minimum compensation standards to early childhood educators that are on par with folks in other professions. So it's moving us in this direction. And so setting in place some workforce supports in the meantime to be able to sort of bridge us to that future state. The bill also upgrades the IT system that's used to administer Vermont's early childhood education system. I know many folks on this meeting today are familiar with the Bright Futures information system. We've been talking for years about the need to upgrade that, as has the department, the Child Development Division, and so that work is in the works. And the bill and the governor's budget authorize the final expenditures to complete that transition within VFIS in the coming years. The bill also contains a couple of studies. So there's an analysis of the governance and administration of the early childhood education system in Vermont that would develop recommendations on how to strengthen and streamline system governance, administration, and accountability structures and resources. And that's really intended to make sure that folks who are most impacted by those decisions are incorporated in that decision-making process. The bill creates an interim advisory committee that's actually housed at Building Bright Futures that would advise the state on regulation and administration of the system and would be informing that analysis, the governance and administration analysis, again, to make sure that the voices of those most impacted by the system are informing the work. And then the last component of the bill is that it charges experts, the state treasurer, the joint fiscal office of the legislature, and some of the governors, commissioners, to identify a stable long-term funding source for a transformed childcare system. So we know that the future that we're moving toward here is expensive and it's going to require significant state investment. And so this is really pulling together the folks who need to be at the table, those experts who can crunch the numbers and analyze what is the actual cost of what we're talking about here and what are stable, fair, long-term financing options to create the revenue that's needed to support this initiative. So that's the big picture of what's in this bill. And I'm happy to say that the House Human Services Committee has taken a week's worth of testimony already on the bill. The great news is that every single member of that committee is a co-sponsor of the bill. Although they don't all agree with every detail in it, they are really, really dedicated to moving this work forward. And so they will be taking testimony again this week. And they're hoping to finish their work on this bill by the end of this week. For folks who don't have the delight of getting to spend every day with legislative committee hearings, the way the process works within the legislature is that there's a point in time by which every bill has to pass out of either the House or the Senate. They have to complete their work on it and get it headed toward the other chamber. And that's known as the crossover deadline. And it's intended so that each chamber has enough time to really consider bills that they're going to need to vote on before the whole session adjourns. And so this week, the House Human Services Committee is finishing work on H171. Next week is town meeting week. And so the legislature adjourns for the week so they can be back in communities in normal years, this year virtually back in communities. And then they'll resume the week after town meeting. And that week is the crossover week for policy bills such as this one. So by that Friday, the bill will have to have completed its journey through whatever committees it's going to go through and be on its way to the floor and headed over to the Senate so that the Senate can then have ample time to consider it all and start the process all over again on the Senate side. The other piece that I didn't mention is that, as Matt said, there are sort of different funding mechanisms that are out there. And so the governor's budget that was proposed, that the House Appropriations Committee is working from right now, does include funding for a number of the provisions in H171. So it includes funding for most of the Child Care Financial Assistance Program components. And it includes funding for the new IT system, which is great. What's not in the governor's budget are the workforce support, so the scholarships and loan repayment programs. There is some support for the existing scholarship programs, but not the expansion that we're hoping for. And it also doesn't include funding for the studies. And some of that is you know, because the governor, you know, the governor's team set their priorities based on what was in front of them at the moment. And like this bill was being worked on and the governor was working on his budget. And so the studies didn't make it into the governor's proposal. It's not necessarily a reflection of the lack of support from the administration, but, you know, they have to make their priorities. And now the legislature is doing its work to figure out what are the priorities of the legislature in terms of funding and how it intersects with the components of H-171. And I know I talk a lot and I talk fast because I watch a lot of legislative hearings on 1.5 speed. So I talk even faster than I used to. So I'm going to stop talking and I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Sarah. So before we open for questions, I just want to call everyone's attention to the Howard Vermont Stand Children and Families report. So I did mention before we started the policy section of our meeting today that Building Bright Futures doesn't advocate on behalf of any one bill or legislative action. That said, we do make recommendations on an annual basis. One of those recommendations this year was recognizing Vermont's early care and education system and workforce as essential. There's also a recommendation that is focused on evolving our data system to address gaps. So both of those are very much so reflected in progress on H-171. Building Bright Futures has been called to testify on H-171, but our role in that testimony has been to say, there are two components of this bill that specifically ask us to execute a scope of work. So our testimony is reflective of whether or not we can execute that scope of work, if it fits within our mission, our values, our statutes, and whether or not the timeline and funding associated with that bill makes sense. So I just wanted to let folks know about that. But now I'd like to open the floor to the State Advisory Council to ask any questions. I know Sarah is on, I know Allie is on as well now.
Sarah, this is Julie. I am wondering if those scholarships are the TEACH scholarships that have kind of that ladder of compensation and additional professional development kind of built into it, or if these are another kind of scholarship that might be freestanding or whatever. Just more info about that would be great.
Sure.
Thanks.
Sure. Hi, Julie. It's nice to see you. It's yes, both and. So the legislature does not specifically name TEACH because they don't name specific programs in funding proposals. The funding, it goes to the Child Development Division and they, you know, put it out to bid. And TEACH has been the recipient of the existing scholarship program, which is for incumbent folks who are already in the workforce. And that is a really great program with very strong proven results because, as you mentioned, Julie, it provides a whole ladder of supports for people. And so the part of the proposal is to increase the funding for those existing scholarships and to expand them to also support folks seeking bachelor's degrees because it currently only goes through associate degrees, licensure, and apprenticeships. So trying to expand on those. And then there's a new scholarship program that's proposed as well, which is really for folks who are entering, you know, considering going to a higher ed program and trying to recruit folks into early childhood education degree programs by providing scholarships to those folks.
Thank you.
I have a question. Sarah, I'm having some people ask me about the advisory committee and possible redundancy with BBF. And, you know, I think there is a difference, but it would help if you could put it in a little encapsulated thing for me to help feedback to people.
Sure. Yeah, it's a great question, Chloe. And I'd invite Morgan and Beth to speak to this too. But that's interesting. The committee, Human Services Committee, had a big conversation about this on Friday even, because people think, oh, BBF, they're like the childcare people, right? And I think the way that I've been talking about it with them is Building Bright Futures has a broad scope thinking about early childhood, and we're, you know, very intentional that Building Bright Futures is thinking beyond just childcare, right, to the you know, vast array of needs for kids birth to 8. And so this is really thinking about a specific component of like a subset of the work and on a time limited basis too. So we're talking about a specifically childcare focused, and early care and education is what the legislation says, an early care and education focused committee with representation, and the business community actually came in on Friday and asked that they also be included in that space, which makes sense because as employers, they have a really big stake in the outcome here, and because they really want to help move this work forward. So it's really talking about a specific membership focusing specifically on early care and education, and there are enumerated in the bill some pieces that group would really be focusing on. And the way that we've been talking about it is it's really, as we're moving toward this future place, even H171 is putting in place some pretty big changes. And so making sure that that work over the next couple of years has a dedicated group of folks who represent a broad array of voices and stakeholders in the work, who can be advising both the Department for Children and Families and the Financing Committee and others as this work moves forward.
Thank you, Sarah. And Chloe, I can jump in and say, you know, we've had a lot of discussions with House Human Services. We're writing a memo right now on behalf of the State Advisory Council and Building Bright Futures broader network. We want to be very clear about the role of the State Advisory Council, as well as the role of our Vermont Early Childhood Action Plan committees. So we don't see the State Advisory Council as the group that would be overseeing and providing that concrete advisory role specific to childcare. We think that there is an opportunity to look at our existing VCAP committee infrastructure and determine who the people that are missing from those tables are, potentially do some restructuring and be very concrete in saying that, yes, Building Bright Futures has the infrastructure necessary to stand up or adjust our existing advisory bodies to do this work, versus creation of a brand new advisory body. So definitely not wanting to increase duplication, but look at our existing infrastructure and see who's not at the table that could strengthen that work and that advisory role.
Morgan, if I could add, I'd also say, Chloe, that the conversation last week was not negative. It's not like there was any big issue or problem or policy difference. It was a pretty classic example, and Representative Brumstead could speak as one who was part of it, of legislators trying to figure things out, asking questions, not having immediate answers right there at their fingertips. And so people start putting pieces together that are only part of the picture, but understand that they're just kind of speculating. It was, I think, it needs to have some response, but it's important to note that it wasn't like there was some A versus B kind of thing being put out there. There's time for people to understand more and have more conversations. Although again, the bill hopefully will be out of committee this week. So if people are interacting with you, there's plenty of opportunity, I think, to jump into the conversation and help them have a more complete picture of what BVF does and why what's being recommended is actually something a little different than what they might have in mind.
Thank you. Flora, I saw that you had your hand raised as well.
Thank you, Morgan. Yeah, I had a quick question on, this is the first time that I'm reading through the bill and going really quickly, that hopefully there's a very strong partnership with public education, right? And we've been trying to do that more Building Bright Futures too, so that there is representation and, you know, like as we move forward, there's a lot, I don't see any school board members or anything in the people that would be involved in this committee. And, you know, through Building Bright Futures, we've been doing a good job about that. But I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities as our population is decreasing and we have less students to have that partnership with schools that know their communities pretty good. So I just wanted to say that.
Thank you, Flora. And I do think there are opportunities for us to determine the makeup of some of these committees that are really driving this work forward. I'm seeing a couple of comments in the chat as well about whether or not parents and early educators will be included. There are absolutely plans in place to make sure that we have parent voice, especially those of young children, and across our committees, not just in terms of this bill, but actually coming as a recommendation out of the State Advisory Council, that as our study sections are being stood up as new advisory bodies, are being included in legislation and in statute, that they have the voices of those most impacted by the service provision or policies included in the decision making. So just wanting folks on the call to really understand that that has been a priority of the State Advisory Council, which is identifying parents and elevating their voice, providing opportunities for leadership, and making sure that they really are in a position to be leading. Jessica, I see that your hand is raised as well.
Thank you, Morgan, and thank you. I just wanted to reiterate exactly what you're saying. I was on the phone actually early this morning with Morgan to talk about these very questions and make sure that we're as inclusive as possible. And we're going to work again together later today. We'll continue. She will be part of our discussions in committee before we get to the final. We want to be as inclusive as we possibly can. And that's why we had the business community in, we have folks from Commerce Committee working with us, Education Committee. It'll probably go to Ways and Means, it'll go to Appropriations. So before this is over, as Matt says, there will be lots of cooks that will have had some opportunity to affect the recipe.
Thank you, Jessica. Any final questions from the State Advisory Council? Julie, go ahead.
And this may be jumping ahead, but I am wondering with the early childhood governance piece of this, how the Agency of Education plans, how is that going to come together, or does that still remain to be seen? If the Child Development Division is going into the Agency of Education, just tell us more about the analysis of governance and how that goes together or not.
That's a great question, Julie. Commissioner Brown and Secretary French are on deck to be speaking in a couple of minutes about their proposal for what this may look like. And one of the things that Sarah's team and our team have talked about is that depending on the timing and what happens and how the different moving pieces progress, they may or may not be at the same time as we're having both of those discussions. But that there may be an opportunity to use that governance study as a way to be understanding the impact and understanding the potential for integration and what that could look like. And we're starting as the State Advisory Council today in today's discussion to have that kind of level set, here's what we are moving towards in terms of a vision, but I think it remains to be seen what the timing of the different proposals will look like, because there hasn't been a bill formally introduced on the transition of CDD to AOE, to my knowledge, as of right now.
Thank you.
Sarah, anything you would add to that before we transition?
No, I think I would have the same answer as you, Morgan. I did just want to quickly, I noticed that Betsy Ruthengun had asked a question about the Blue Ribbon Commission and how the bill is building on that. And I would say that in drafting the bill, I know that the lead sponsors, one of whom is Representative Brumstead, who's here right now, we're looking very closely at the work of the Blue Ribbon Commission, and a lot of what's in the bill and the out years planning is based very much on the recommendations of the Blue Ribbon Commission and the conversations that were happening there. So it's pretty directly embedded in most of that. And the committee has not, in the last week anyway, dived back into all the recommendations from the Blue Ribbon Commission, in part just because their time is so compressed. But it has been referenced in testimony a number of times, and folks have referred back to it. So I would say the work that everybody has done over the past 5 years is directly informing the conversations that are happening right now in the legislature. And it's really exciting to see all of your hard work paying off.
Thank you, Sarah.
Morgan, before we transition, can I jump in with a question?
Of course.
I was trying to figure out how to raise my hand and it wasn't going well. So I know that one of the issues that's really emerged during this pandemic is the disparity in access to resources that's experienced by our marginalized communities. And when I see the energy that's gone into this planning and kind of consider the amount of time that's been taken in developing these recommendations and bills, I wonder how, Sarah, in particular, how you perceive that's expressed in the bill in particular? Maybe a focus on recruiting or creating a kind of a pipeline of early childhood educators from our English language learner communities, for example, or families who would not have otherwise have access to post-secondary education. Can you talk a little bit about how that current movement is expressed in this bill?
What a great question, Emily. Thanks for that. Yeah, I think a lot of the focus on the, as you just said, on the sort of the recruiting a new pipeline of early childhood educators is really stemming from a lot of those conversations. And you'll notice in a couple places in the bill, if you take the time to read through all of it, there's specific reference to embedding anti-racist curricula in classrooms. We're recommending adding language to the membership of the advisory committee that specifically calls out that representation on that committee needs to be representative of the increasing diversity of voices in Vermont, especially the increasing diversity of young children in Vermont. And so we've been definitely looking for opportunities to call that out, and I think it's certainly evolving. And we're really eager to think in the coming weeks about how more voices can be represented. And we had a conversation with the Human Services Committee about this last week around how we can make sure more voices are present during those conversations, as opposed to just Matt and me and Morgan. We need, we need folks who are most directly impacted by the decisions made in the legislature to be present in those conversations. And there are lots of ways that folks can access the committees as well, not just through being able to take 2 hours in the middle of a Wednesday afternoon to be present on Zoom with the committee, but there are lots of opportunities for folks to have their voices heard there through submitting written testimony or having an interview with, someone of the many of us here, and then being able to, relay that to, transcribe it and relay it to the committee. There are phone call opportunities. There's direct conversations with members of those committees. And I think the Human Services Committee especially has been thinking carefully around how they're doing outreach in their communities to make sure that they're connecting with folks. I've really appreciated the conversation. Feels really different this year in Representative Brunstad's committee especially, which has been really great to see, and we still have so much work to do, I would say.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Sarah. Oh, sorry.
I would just say one quick thing about that is just that even during the budget process this year, we just submitted a lot of our, what would I say, suggestions to the Appropriations Committee of where to put funds. And we really worked hard to make sure that we were thinking about funds in the areas where you most see new Americans in the BIPOC community. And how do we make sure that that our child care centers have the people in the BIPOC world have people to take care of their children that are similar and they feel comfortable leaving their child there, and with new Americans especially. And so we did try and put more funds in the area of the Parent-Child Center that is located inside of, and I'm going to forget the initials for it, but I think it's the American Association of, I'm not sure, I'm sorry, but I could get it back to Morgan to make sure that you get that information as well. But we really did work hard this year to do a lot more of that, more than we have in the past, for sure. So.
Thank you, Jessica. And we should say that across the board, we have some really strong legislative champions who really care about how we move forward for kids and families. So thank you. Thank you to Sarah and Matt for giving that overview of what to expect and where we are in this legislative session. I highly suggest, if you're interested in hearing more, reaching out directly to their teams. Incredibly valuable resources for those of us who are not right directly in the advocacy world. So thank you both. So I do want to transition to the next section of our meeting, where we're going to hear from Secretary Dan French and Commissioner Sean Brown about the governor's Cradle to Career vision. I'm going to give you a little bit of a heads up of what to expect for the next hour. So we are going to close the chat bar during the presentation and ask that all questions be held at the end. And we will open that chat bar right at the end of that session once they've finished. After leadership have presented, we're going to give the board, the State Advisory Council, between 10 to 15 minutes, depending on the timing of that presentation, to have discussion and Q&A with our agency leaders. And we recognize that so many folks who are on the call today, and Dan and Sean for the fact that you're just joining. There are about 225 folks on the call today, really interested in hearing about this vision. So for folks who are on the line, we really want to ask that you are asking questions in the chat bar. We will make sure if we don't get to all of those questions, we will provide them directly to agency leadership after today's meeting and really work to get some frequently asked questions going. At 2:30 or about 2:30, we're going to break into small group discussions focused on 3 questions that were outlined in our agenda today. And those questions are, what are the key components of an integrated early childhood system from the prenatal period to age 8? What are the persistent barriers Vermont faces to achieving those components of an integrated system? And then what are the other opportunities for improvements to reach true integration? And for those who may not have heard this, we will follow today's meeting with a qualitative feedback form or a survey that'll allow stakeholders statewide to reflect on these same questions that we are asking folks to fill out. So as you're listening to our agency leadership presentation today, we want you to keep those 3 questions in mind and recognize that we have seen so many challenges across our early childhood sector. The pandemic has really created additional not necessarily additional challenges, but has really given us an expansion or widening of the gaps that we were already facing. So really looking at right now as a moment for thinking about how we move forward towards an integrated system of services. And our agency leaders are here today to present that Governor's Cradle to Career vision, which they believe is one possible strategy. So we know you're all really excited to hear for the first time more about this proposal, what it'll mean for children, families, and professionals, and recognize that this is just the first of many discussions that we're going to be having on how we move forward towards an integrated system. So for the next 60 minutes, I really want to ask that everyone on the call comes to this virtual table with an open mind, curiosity, and creating space to be vulnerable to participate in a discussion about how we move towards our vision for Vermont's early childhood system outlined in the VCAP. And the following 4 goals are outlined. It's a system where all children have a healthy start, where families and communities play a leading role in children's well-being, where children and families have access to high quality opportunities that meet their needs, and where the early childhood system is integrated, well-resourced, and data informed. So I'm now going to hand it over, and I'd like to welcome Education Secretary Dan French and DCF Commissioner Sean Brown.
Thank you. It's good to be here. It's a great, incredible turnout. It's phenomenal. And thank you for the opportunity to be here. I'm here with Commissioner Brown and Sarah Truckle from DCF as well. We have a PowerPoint we'll speak to. My understanding, we're going to take about maybe 10, 15 minutes or so to introduce this, then we'll take some questions.
That's perfect.
Okay. Sarah, do you want to put up the PowerPoint?
And I just wanted to say good afternoon to everyone as well. It's quite a large group. I was a little startled when I saw how many were on the Zoom meeting. And I'd also just like to give a shout out to Reva Murphy, who I see who's on the meeting. I haven't seen you in a while, Reva. Hope you're doing well.
Hi, Reva. Why don't we just leave it there for a second, Sarah? I'll just provide some introductory comments. I say, as Morgan was alluding to, this proposal is essentially designed to start a conversation about, from our perspective, a more integrated service delivery model. And essentially what it does is it moves key functions of childcare to the Agency of Education. The Agency of Education currently has about 160 employees, and we're organized into divisions. And each division's about 20 to 30 personnel. And we currently, as I'm sure many of you are aware, we supervise pre-K in the public school space. But with this transition, what we'd be doing is creating an entirely new division inside the agency of approximately 30 to 35 people. For conversation purposes, I'd call it a division of early care and learning, led by a division director. And bringing together the pre-K functions that are currently in the agency with the early care functions that are at CDD. And the other point I'd make is that the division leader at the agency also functions as a member of the cabinet and the Secretary of Education. So it definitely puts emphasis in a key policy area to the state, where currently inside the Agency of Education, the pre-K team is embedded as part of a larger student support division. But the vision that's driving this proposal is the idea of integrated service delivery. As Morgan observed, the governor's vision of cradle to career, from birth to higher ed, is certainly one aspect of that integration, but particularly in this space, we're talking about a much tighter integration between the child care, early learning and care, or early care and with early learning, and creating potential for even better integration of our policy since it would be housed in one agency. This proposal is not about having the K-12 system get into the child care provisioning of services, but once again, it's really about promoting more seamless transition between these two areas. It would create a more common regulatory framework for these areas, better integration of federal dollars, particularly IDEA B and IDEA C, two important funding streams for this space. And also leverage an integrated data model, which we started working on among the two agencies, but is really being led by the Agency of Education and its state longitudinal data system. As we were putting this together, in my experience, I've been secretary for 3 years, and certainly working with Act 166 and pre-K. I think, what I find looking nationally is that states staff these programs or structure these programs one of two ways: the way we have it currently now in Vermont, or to consolidate the functions into one agency or department, which is what we're proposing. And the point I'd make on that is that as I've been looking at 166 in particular, we've struggled a bit on the dual regulatory pieces of pre-K, but I think more importantly, it's been challenging inside a state government often to bring both teams together across agencies, and even when we were addressing things like review and the regulation and so forth, it can be very challenging. So I think to a certain extent, once again, looking at the national landscape, this isn't necessarily going to resolve those issues automatically, but it does create a potential for us to do more in this space. And it is one of the other things I've observed in my tenure as secretary is there's broad agreement in our state that early learning and care should be a priority. And I find that commitment, regardless of who I'm talking to on either side of the political spectrum, business leaders, governmental leaders, and so forth, everyone is in agreement, probably more so now as a result of COVID than before. But I would make the observation that we've become a national leader in this space, not necessarily because of our internal governmental structure, but perhaps in spite of it. And I think in particular, as we're contemplating a post-COVID environment, which from my perspective will hopefully be here sooner rather than later, and what we're observing at a national level, talking with other rural states in particular, we think the future of policy and education and social services will be an integrated future, and meaning that we have to leverage the infrastructure that's in our rural communities and really seek those synergies, because the communities themselves aren't necessarily big enough in some cases to justify those standalone structures. So we need to position ourselves in Vermont, not only as part of COVID relief, but also just the broader landscape to work in a more integrated model that's specifically responsive to our regions. And that's, for those of you I've worked with in the last couple of years, something, that's driven me as an educational leader, starting as I did 15 years in the Kingdom and then working in Southern Vermont, then working statewide as a consultant. There are significant variations in our regional policy delivery systems. And that's something we have to work on inside of state government to ensure that we're meeting the needs of all students and all children throughout the state. So I think, for this policy proposal is definitely driven by this idea of systems integration. But it's also to acknowledge that our economy is going to be taking some time to recover from this emergency. We're going to be operating in a fairly constrained environment initially anyway. And it is important to acknowledge that this proposal does create some efficiencies, which are not unimportant in that type of environment. So just as a way of sort of setting some context on this, and why don't we delve into it a bit, and I'll invite Sean to chime in make some comments. So if we want to, and I think you're already on the next slide, correct?
Sure. Thank you, Dan. Well said. And I would just, as Dan said, that this is really the beginning of a conversation. And we want to stress during this conversation that we need a lot of work needs to be done with our partners and providers over the coming months to really flesh out the details of moving this vision forward. And that's why we have an 18-month plan, and that's a part of this, where the earliest that this would take effect would be July of 22. So that's a little under 18 months from now, because it would be a big structural shift in terms of where some of these functions would reside in state government. And so those are conversations that need to happen during that time frame. Nothing regarding this proposal is included in the governor's 22 budget proposal. The earliest you would see any changes would be in the 23 budget proposal for next year. And so we'll just kind of start walking you through the proposal, just as, to refresh many memories here. Our Child Development Division really breaks down into these different areas of early care and learning, which includes the licensing and the quality and system integrations work, the CCFAP financial assistance program, prevention programs, working, the master grants, working with parent-child centers, training and development, and then also the Children's Integrated Services, and then also the core operations team here in the central office as well. So that's kind of what makes up our Child Development Division.
And just again, this idea of an integrated vision, certainly the governor's vision, but I think it's one, particularly for rural states, that becomes very critical to acknowledge, and I would say not only rural, but states that have demographic contexts like Vermont, where we have an aging population, and really our workforce and every Vermonter becomes one of our most valuable assets, and we have to ensure, not just from a moral perspective, but from an economic perspective, that each child reaches his or her full potential. And that is going to require a better integration of these services. And so this slide essentially just represents that sort of commitment and is driving, as I mentioned, the vision behind the structural change. And certainly, as we mentioned, opportunities out of the integration, improved responsiveness on the part of state government. Certainly, the pre-K functions that are currently supervised by two different agencies would be brought under one division inside the agency. As I mentioned, the financial pieces, the data pieces, and certainly, again, on the efficiency piece, not to underestimate that, but it does allow us to create some efficiencies that theoretically could focus resources on the actual delivery of services, as opposed to the administration of these systems themselves. So it's not the entire Child Development Division that would be moved to the Agency of Education. There's certain functions that would be reallocated to other AHS areas. Perhaps, Sean, if you want to break this out a little bit better or talk about the AHS aspect.
Yeah, so in terms of the pieces that we envision moving over to your Agency of Education would be, the early care and licensing and regulation. So it would all be housed under that new division within AOE. We would find efficiencies and from not having to co-administer and coordinate, between Act 166 and after-school providers. That would all be maintained under AOE. It would really provide that birth to grade 12 care and learning system. Also would allow us to really administer IDA Part C and B under the Agency of Education. Right now, some of those dollars are administered here through the Child Development Division, and this would bring all of the administration under one umbrella under AOE. And then we would also reallocate the Child Development Division through different areas of the Agency of Human Services. Some of our services and team would go to the Department of Health in terms of maternal and child health, the Children's Integrated Services. Those pieces would move over to the Department of Health. Also, we have our Economic Services Division that administers financial benefit programs. And so the oversight of the CCFAP program would move over to the Economic Services Division. However, we're not proposing a change in how that work is performed now under contracts with our community partners for information and referral services, but also for that eligibility determination. We would just, the oversight of that work and those contracts with our partners would move over to the Economic Services Division. And then I would let Sarah Truckle just touch on real quick the pieces that would be moving to the Department of Mental Health. That's more of the movement of some funds.
To do so. So for the Department of Mental Health, they would receive the funding and the services associated with the early childhood family mental health services currently provided in the CIS bundle, also referred to as ECFMH services. So the Department of Health would receive the home visiting services in coordination with their existing home visiting services that they provide now under their McV funding. And the Department of Mental Health would receive those ECFMH services consistent with the work that they're already doing in that field as well.
Thank you, Sarah.
Great. We want to, okay.
Yep.
So
and then as I touched on before, so like the administration of the Parent-Child Center master grants would move over to the Department of Mental Health. We don't envision any significant changes there other than they would just be administered through the Department of Health. The home visiting and then the CIS would all move over to the Vermont Department of Health.
You can go to the next slide. Just more granularity for purposes of today's conversation. Why don't we move along a little bit? And then
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
And then I would just touch on this, Dan, real quick, if I could just jump in. We were proposing or are proposing, not that the services would stop, but that the way those services are provided through the bundle would be broken up. And we envision there would be some administrative savings there. But obviously, I think we've already heard from some of our partners regarding concerns of this. And this is one of those areas where I think further conversation, we'd want to understand those concerns a little bit more as well. We obviously understand that this would be a significant change to the program and would want to engage and hear your concerns more as we move this proposal forward, particularly in this area. So.
Okay. Yeah, and I think this is our last slide. I'll just sort of try to wrap a little bit and open up for questions, Morgan. I think, again, the vision here is to move towards a more integrated structure inside of state government by bringing better part of the CDD early care functions over to the Agency of Education. We intentionally did not sponsor or introduce specific statutory language on this initially. The idea was to present the idea in the interest of bringing forward, and I would say a responsibility to bring forward good government ideas. And this is a concept that's been thought about for a while, and we thought it was time to bring it forward. And our hope was to engage with stakeholder groups such as Building Bright Futures and folks around the state, providers, to begin this conversation. So that's starting to happen now. So what we've done in this slideshow, the slide presentation merely just sort of outlines a sort of a prototype of what could happen, but we certainly are very interested in partnering with people on this. I would say now is a common vision for integrated service and more effective service delivery for all students and children in the state.
All right, thank you all. Sarah, if you want to pull down the screen share, we're going to reopen the chat. And what we'd like to do is very similar to what we did during the earlier policy session. We are going to open the floor for the State Advisory Council to engage in a discussion with Commissioner Brown and Secretary French. we would like to invite others to be asking questions in the chat, and depending on how far we get, we'll answer some of those, but we will make sure that all of those questions get to our agency leadership. So I do want to open the floor for the State Advisory Council.
This is Christy. I have a clarification and then a question. So my clarification is to make sure folks understand that Head Start is not housed under any state agency. We're actually are all nonprofits, but there is an office in the state that helps us coordinate with the state so that we are in communication and working in the same direction. And then I had a question. I'm just wondering what you folks envision in early education. The wraparound services are often just as important to the end success of the child as the education piece that we do. And I'm wondering, as what I saw in your presentation is it looks like a lot of those wraparound services are splintering into different agencies. And I'm wondering how you envision making sure that all of that is coordinated and integrated, which will really be critical for this to be a success.
Yeah, I'll start, Sean, if that's okay. I think, there's certainly, pieces of this that are splintering and then pieces of this are being brought together. And I think that's a fair observation. I think that's a tension in any kind of organizational change. Is it vertical integration or horizontal integration? So on the one hand, you could say, yes, these are being splintered off, but on the other hand, in the case of economic services, they're now being brought together. And so there's a more holistic potential for those folks that are working with families from a economic support perspective to view the whole package, if you will, or more of the whole package as opposed to a piece of it. But I think your point is a very good one, and it's one that we've been working on as a result of our preparing for what we're calling recovery phase of the COVID emergency, where we're going to really work hard to bring different agency folks together to staff sort of support teams for each region of our state. And I think that's going to be necessary regardless. But we have struggled and continue, I think we'll always struggle with that partnership. And my experience when I was in the Kingdom, that kind of partnering across agency or department boundaries was really predicated on individual leadership. So we would build systems and structures of collaboration that were highly dependent on who the individuals were and their willingness to have those collaborations. Whereas in other parts of the states, there's real systems that are available to be leveraged. So I think our goal coming out of COVID in particular is to strengthen those collaborative processes on a regional basis so they're systems, not necessarily just predicated solely on individual leaders. But I think you raise a good point, but I would say in response, it's not just about splintering some things. We are bringing other things together, but this issue of integration is a central consideration for us as a state.
Yeah, and if I was to just jump in, and that was a great question as well, Christy, so thank you. I would say that while those wraparound services are there now, they exist within a splintered system. So, like IDA Part C is in one system and then Part B is in another. And as children kind of age and grow and move through that system, there's these transitions, so you're not, you're in the CDD system 0 to 3, and then you start moving into the school age system beyond that and the way the funding flows. And I think there would be some synergies that would, that we could build upon by having that all be overseen within the agency of education, where they're working with those same providers, and also they start working with those same kids just as they age and grow. And so I think there's opportunities there to strengthen the existing system of those wraparound services, but you make a good point that we wouldn't want to lose sight that in the 0 to 3 realm, we'd want to be careful not to disturb, those wraparound services now as they would kind of move into the agency of education's realm.
Thank you. I do want to quickly note the time for Dan and Sean, but we do have several questions from the State Advisory Council if you're able to stay on for a couple more minutes. So in the following order, Chloe, Floor, and then Amy. And then Julie.
Thank you.
No, I didn't have my hand up. I'm just listening right now.
Floor.
Hi, thank you, Secretary French and Sean. I just have a quick question. I know that the AOE has struggled with being able to staff their different departments. So I'm curious, would you be moving staff from human resource to the AOE? Or how would we create a sustainable system so that you're able to have, you were talking about between 20 and 30 people. And as you know, like just because we work directly with you guys, a lot of your people are doing more than 4 or 5 jobs. And so how would we make this sustainable?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's really about just bringing the teams from CDD to the agency of education. So it's more of a co-location. So the capacity that exists at AHS to administer these programs would be brought together with the pre-K staff at the agency of education. If that, there's no loss of positions in that transition. We'd be bringing everyone together into a newly created division. It'll probably be closer to 30 to 35 staff.
Thank you.
Amy?
I don't know how to put my hand down, so we'll just stay up the whole meeting. So I keep hearing integration, 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 which is real jazzy, and I like it because that's a good thing. However, then I hear something called Children's Integrated Services, which the state worked really hard to do and has specific reasons for having done that. I hear about the pulling apart of those integrated services, and I have a real concern for that, especially, and it should be noted that other states reach out to us quite frequently to ask how we did that and have been trying to replicate that in their states. So I guess my question and thinking about, I know it sounds like a great idea to put Part C in with Part B, but the reason why it's in Children's Integrated Services is because the children have special health needs or developmental barriers. There's other things then that are going on with that family where they might need early childhood and family mental health supports. They might need family support, home visiting. And so I want to, if you can help me to understand how your proposal to pull apart Children's Integrated Services is integrating the system.
Yeah. Good. Oh, go ahead, Dan.
Sean.
Yeah.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to go ahead, Dan, if you want to start first.
No, I'll defer to you. Go ahead. This is
okay. Amy, we're not proposing that those services go away. I think in just terms of, it's no secret as we work with our CIS providers that the bundle has been significantly, in terms of what the cost of care is, in terms of and what the rate is that providers are paid. There's a concern out there that rate doesn't fully compensate our providers. What we're proposing is that it's really that the administrative cost of that bundle are pretty high. And what we're saying is let's figure out a way to continue to provide those services. We're not proposing that they stop, but we're proposing paying for them in a different way so that if we find administrative savings, we can roll those into the service that we provide kids in those programs so that we actually are paying providers more and hopefully can provide more services. I think that's how we're looking at it. We're not pulling the services apart and saying we're going to stop providing these services. I think what we're looking at is figuring out how to pay for them a little bit more effectively so that we can roll any dollar saved back into more service for those kids. That's how we're approaching it.
Yeah, and I was just the integration. I would go back to this idea of horizontal versus vertical integration. The vertical integration piece is when the children get older. So as they grow from idea B to idea C, how that integration can occur when it's staffed within one division, because ultimately those students will move up through the system, and to provide a more seamless integration on a vertical basis is probably better achieved by bringing those together into one team. But yeah, it's a fair observation that the horizontal piece of bringing all services around children that exists now would be broken to a certain extent. But a bulk of that would be brought over to the Agency of Education. But what it does allow for better, because the children are going to, as they get older, it does provide opportunities for the vertical integration to occur more seamlessly.
I think it's
Sean's
just important to keep in mind that children that age aren't, it's about the family at the center, and not siloed funding streams, that multi-generational work. And that is the concern of moving those folks over to a system that isn't necessarily doing multi-gen work. As a parent of a kid in a wonderful school, it's not about multi-gen, it's about the child. And those children, those 2-year-olds aren't getting themselves to school or to those services themselves. It's about the family-centered approach.
Yeah, sure. And the expectation is that expertise and that family-centered piece would be brought to the Agency of Education to add to that focus. But when it comes time to hand that focus off to the school-based focus, it would be far less seamless than it is today.
Okay, so thank you, Secretary French and Commissioner Brown. Are there last minute comments from either of you to this very strong group of early childhood leaders before we break out into small groups?
No, thank you for the time. And this is, it's a challenging environment to present because I can't see all your faces and so forth, but I appreciate your work. I think, the issue, again, of sort of the vertical and horizontal integration is a valid concern. I think, this isn't necessarily going to alleviate us of a lot of the hard work and partnership that needs to occur regardless where we're going as a state. We've accomplished so much. But I would make the observation that we have unequal service delivery models across the state that are partially caused by the lack of integration that occurs in state government. And if we're sincere and committed to equity and addressing the needs of all children, we need to have that focus inside of state government to ensure the regional responsiveness that's going to be necessary for our future success. Thank you for your time today. It was great being here with you.
Yes, thank you.
All right. Thank you. And, I want to let everyone know that we are very closely monitoring the chat as well as our email thread. So we will be compiling all of these questions. We also, as we move into small group discussions, will continue to document all of the different questions, comments, concerns, and potential opportunities as we move forward. So thank you, Secretary French and Secretary Brown, for spending time with us this afternoon. Before we transition into those small group discussions, I do want to reset our discussion to really be talking about how we are moving towards the early childhood vision for the state of Vermont through Vermont's Early Childhood Action Plan, which again is the strategic plan and the 5-year vision for all children and families prenatal to age 8. So I articulated those goals a little bit earlier in today's discussion. Goal 1 being all children have a healthy start. Goal 2 is that families and communities play a leading role in children's well-being. Goal 3 is that all children and families have access to high quality opportunities that meet their needs. And goal 4, which is really what we're focused on today, is that the early childhood system will be integrated, well-resourced, and data informed. So we, as a state, have committed to building a seamless, equitable system of care for children and families. And that is really the focus of goal 4. And there are 3 different pieces to that: integration, data, and resources. And each of those components is really moving us towards optimal development and family well-being. So when we say integration, we're talking about collaborative leadership, coordination and communication across all levels, aligned visioning and language that's championed by both agency and community leaders, and really looking to streamline system experience for families and for children. So our vision is to build that coordination across every sector, including early care, education, health, mental health, housing, business community, everyone. So the question for you all today is, how are we doing as a state right now? How are we doing in building an integrated system? And the purpose of this upcoming session is to answer those 3 questions that are on the screen. And so what we're going to move towards right now is time in small groups that are led by peers. So we've asked 16 different neutral conveners to come to our table, both BBF staff and others, to facilitate really productive conversations that will allow us to dive a little bit deeper. Now that we have a little bit stronger a sense of what the agency's proposal is in terms of this cradle to career vision. So in the next 20 minutes, we'll discuss in these small groups what was just proposed based on what you heard in the presentation. We'll use this opportunity to deepen our understanding of integration in the early childhood system and really just connect with others around this very broad, diverse table of early childhood partners who are really invested and committed to doing this work. And then we'll also be inviting folks to provide input, both specific to this proposal, but then even more broadly about integration. So the way we're going to do that is through idea boards using those small groups. And regardless of whether or not you provide verbal feedback today or written feedback on the idea boards, we are asking you to also submit anonymous survey responses that will happen following the meeting to really capture that feedback and provide that back to policymakers and to inform the VCAP. A really important note for everyone on the call is that our agency leaders that serve on the State Advisory Council are really here to listen to this conversation. So they are part of the governor's administration. So we should not be directing questions to them to further clarify these proposals. They are here to be listeners, and we are here to give them the feedback they need to understand how to best support kids and families moving forward. I also want to note that our neutral facilitators do not have any more information than any of you right now. So again, questions should be documented and captured, but not directing questions directly to our facilitators. So we are now going to transition into our small groups. They have been pre-populated and you will be split off. And at the beginning of that section, one of your conveners or your facilitator will give you the quick overview and we'll move forward into small group discussions. So thanks for hanging with us.